I'm home, huh? Hey, why did you come back when you don't belong here anymore? What do you mean I don't belong here? I don't need someone who gives birth to a child with a cheating partner. When I returned home after giving birth at my parents' house, my husband's parents were there, and all my clothes were gone. Not only that, but they were also calling my newborn child the offspring of an affair. There's a limit to how much they can mock someone. Fine. I'll leave as you wish. But once I'm gone, where will you live? I'll live here, of course. I'll take this house as compensation for alimony. Do you really think you can do that? Because this house is. My husband was so confident until he heard what I had to say. Then his smirk disappeared, and he turned pale, collapsing to his knees. I'm Yasmin, a 31-year-old homemaker. I met my husband, John, through a friend's introduction, and remarried after a year of dating. We both wanted children, but even after a year of marriage, we were not blessed with any. However, our marriage wasn't troubled aside from our inability to conceive, and I had built a good relationship with his parents. This evening, my dad and mom are coming over. How about we go out for dinner? Sure, I'll get ready. We decided to go out for dinner with his parents that day, but I quickly realized it was my mother-in-law's considerate gesture. After a year of marriage and no children, I started to think there might be something wrong with me. So, I recently began fertility treatments. But there were no visible results. I heard there are many reasons for infertility, and we didn't know why we couldn't have children. The journey with no end in sight was exhausting. I was beginning to dread going to the hospital to face no progress and was thinking of giving up on fertility treatments, but then my mother-in-law reached out to help. She had undergone fertility treatments to conceive my husband, so she understood my feelings the best. She comforted me over the phone after my hospital visits. The treatments were costly and unproductive, and she probably sensed my despair from my voice. Until a year ago, she was a stranger to me, but I was grateful for her kindness. With her support, I kept going with the treatments. Before entering the restaurant, I whispered a thank you to my mother-in-law, who smiled back warmly. I was glad they were my in-laws and enjoyed the dinner as a stress reliever from my fertility treatment. Then my husband had to go on a business trip, and we had to pause our efforts to conceive. I heard that continuity is important in fertility treatments, so I was disappointed, but work is work. Maybe taking a break from the stress of trying to conceive would help me recover mentally. I tried to see the positive side. Even after he left, my mother-in-law visited me weekly to take care of my mental health. She was the only one I could talk to about the hardships of fertility treatments and the loneliness of being apart from my husband. Thanks to my mother-in-law, I didn't have to feel that bad. Half a year flew by, and my husband's business trip ended. I was feeling much better mentally and knew I had to refocus on getting pregnant soon due to my age. No way. Yes. Why are you shouting all of a sudden? What happened? I'm pregnant. Our baby is finally coming. Seeing the 2 lines on the pregnancy test, I cried tears of joy. It had been a long-awaited pregnancy. We had overcome periods of anxiety and unsuccessful fertility treatments. I was overwhelmed with happiness, but my husband just gave a strained smile. Maybe he's not happy. No, that can't be the case. Perhaps he was just shocked and needed time to process the news. I shared the joy openly and immediately informed my parents and his. Both sets of parents were overjoyed, and I was too excited to sleep that night. I decided to focus on a healthy pregnancy. But the next day, I assume you know, but I'm busy with work, so I can't help much around house duties. Don't bother me too much, okay? His tone wasn't harsh, but I was at a loss for words. I felt good that morning after finding out about the pregnancy, but what did he mean by that? His strange smile from the day before and now this. Maybe he wasn't happy about the pregnancy. But that couldn't be true. We had overcome difficult times together to reach this point in our pregnancy. He was busy with work, so maybe there was no deeper meaning to his words. I planned to return to my parents' house for a while, so I didn't take it too seriously. But my discomfort with my husband's attitude began when my morning sickness started. I don't know if it's morning sickness or what, but constantly buying ready to eat is expensive, and I can't relax after work. Give me a break, will you? Sorry. I'll cook tomorrow. There's no tomorrow for someone who can't do it today. He must be stressed out because he is tired from work. I felt guilty for not being able to meet his expectations for housework and meals due to my severe morning sickness in my first pregnancy. But morning sickness won't last forever. Once it eases, I should be able to do more around the house and hopefully, our relationship will get back to normal. I thought. I can't just be soft on myself, especially for our upcoming child and my husband, who's always working hard. I pushed myself to cook and do housework as much as possible, even with the morning sickness, but it seems my efforts didn't reach him. Gradually, he stopped coming home at night and began spending his evenings out. My hormonal imbalances from the pregnancy made me feel mentally unstable. I worried if we couldn't resolve our issues before the baby's birth, could we really build a happy family of 3? Such anxieties continued on the nights he was absent. But as I struggled through each day, I suddenly found myself in the 7th month of pregnancy and decided to return to my parents' house. I had already discussed this with them and my husband. Honestly, I felt more at ease going back to my parents' house than staying with my husband. Perhaps feeling suffocated living with a pregnant wife, my husband readily agreed to my going back home. I took a 2-hour taxi ride to my parents' house. Don't worry, we'll support you from now on. I had told my mother weeks before about the deteriorating relationship with my husband, John. While admitting he was busy with work, I also vented my frustration about him not supporting me much. So, my mother had been worried about me, and since returning home, I've been able to relax truly, even managing to spend days without a single worry. It was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I regretted not returning home sooner. The comfort at my parents' house was so good that I gave birth to a boy without any issues. He was slightly underweight but cried loudly and felt warm when I held him, bringing me to tears of indescribable joy. Busy with work, John couldn't be there for the birth, but my parents cried with me. Despite the hard times during the pregnancy, I was truly glad to have overcome them. I stayed in the hospital for a week after giving birth, with my parents visiting daily. However, John was noticeably absent. He congratulated me on the birth but didn't come to see our baby. Though I understood he was busy, I couldn't help feeling angry. Was his work more important than his child? But the excitement of spending days with my son overrode these feelings. That week felt incredibly long, but finally leaving the hospital with my baby made me truly feel like a mother. Hello. I was discharged from the hospital today. Though I had informed her by email, I called my mother-in-law to talk. She had supported me the most until I got pregnant, and I really wanted her to be the first to see her grandson. But since she lived far from my parents' house, I planned to show her the baby once things settled down. John told me that you two are getting a divorce. Is that true? What? Instead of congratulations, she hit me with this shocking news. That couldn't be true. Although John and I had been on bad terms before the birth, it wasn't to the extent of divorce. It was just stress on both sides, and now was an important time to care for our son together. I had no idea why she would say such a thing, but I firmly responded. That's ridiculous. Please don't say such things. No, I'm serious. She then explained that John indeed intended to divorce me. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke, but my kind-hearted mother-in-law wouldn't do such a thing. Her words seemed far-fetched, but not impossible. I calmed myself and decided to contact John. My heart raced and my body trembled as I dialed his number, hoping it was all a misunderstanding. Hello. Hey, what's up? What do you mean what's up? Your mother told me that you want a divorce. I didn't care for pleasantries. I just needed to confirm his true feelings. He hadn't been there for the birth or even to see our baby afterward. Perhaps he really wanted a divorce and didn't care about us. That's why what my mother-in-law was saying was believable, but I couldn't believe anything until I heard it from my husband's mouth. Please let this be a misunderstanding. I prayed while waiting for his answer, but reality was not so kind. Oh, you've heard already? Well, that's right. I can't live with someone who cheats with another man and has his child. A woman who cheats with another man. My husband, John, was under the misconception that I had an affair behind his back and gave birth to the other man's child. This was what I heard from my mother-in-law. It turned out that while I was away giving birth at my parents' house, John had been telling his parents that I was having an affair. I didn't know when he started to misunderstand, but his cold attitude towards me during my pregnancy and his absence at the birth were because of this reason. But did John really think I was cheating? Or was there some other reason he wanted a divorce? I couldn't tell, but I knew I had to talk to him in person, so I decided to return to our house a month after returning to my parents. I'm home. Huh? Why did you come back? I told you, you have no place in this house. It seemed John hadn't got my message about coming home today. Perhaps he had blocked my number. Well, it didn't matter to someone who was considering divorce. I wasn't surprised by his cold reception. I continued calmly without losing my composure. Do you really intend to divorce me? There's no proof I cheated. I know you've been cheating. Plus, I've already moved my parents out and got rid of your stuff. This house is mine now. John bragged with a smirk, heading to the living room. Following him, I saw my father-in-law and mother-in-law sitting at the dining table, and John, grinning, holding the divorce papers. If we are to divorce, this house is mine since I got it from my parents. You should be the one leaving. That's ridiculous. You cheated, so I'm taking this house as alimony. It's 3 against 1 here. You don't stand a chance. I hadn't done anything to be suspected of cheating. Seeing John's smirking face, I realized everything. He was framing me, thinking he had convinced his parents to be on his side. Was he under the delusion that by creating a 3 against 1 situation, he could take the house? He was gravely mistaken. I'm going to make him suffer from this, thinking that. I was about to argue, John said, we're moving out our stuff. The movers are here. But my mother-in-law retorted. Trapping your wife is despicable. We're leaving. John's face changed from confident smirking to palpable panic. But this was all part of the plan. He thought he had won over his parents, but he underestimated people. Without evidence, why would they believe his word? I had shared many concerns with my mother-in-law and built a strong relationship. Underestimating this was his downfall. After hanging up with John, I called his parents again. I shared what John had said and reiterated that I hadn't cheated. They then became my allies, confessing they had found John's recent actions suspicious. He had suddenly claimed I cheated and that he would take the house, suggesting they live together. They had been living in a rental, so living with John in a house would be financially beneficial. They suspected John was trying to leverage this to take the house from me. He might be clever in a way but careless in the end. And his parents, who knew him best, wouldn't be easily fooled. At this point, it was already decided that my in-laws and I would outsmart John, but one thing was still unclear. Why had John suddenly started this? Our long-awaited child was born, and everything should have been perfect. What happened to him? I didn't have the answer yet. Stop pinning your own affair on others. We're leaving this house, so prepare for alimony and child support. Wait. Mom. What are you talking about? An affair. John and I were both shocked by my mother-in-law's words. He was having an affair? What did that mean? Maybe because he cheated on me, I got in the way and was trying to kick him out. Was he trying to get rid of me to take the house I got from my parents? That's beyond despicable. He's trying to ruin my and my son's life and take a significant asset. Ridiculous. Do you think you can get away with this? Wait. I haven't cheated. Just yesterday, a private investigator gave us the findings. They were supposed to report back in a week, but they had more than enough evidence already, my father-in-law said, pulling out a large envelope from his bag. It contained several photos and a report about 20 pages long, stapled together. The first page read investigation results of infidelity, with attached photos of John holding hands with a young woman. Disgusting. I glared at John, seeing him now as nothing more than a base creature driven by his desires. He seemed like nothing more than a creature driven recklessly by his own desires, less than an animal. I was speechless, but upon closely examining the photos, there were some capturing the moment he entered a hotel. Despite just having a child, it was apparent he had no awareness as a father. My feelings shifted from anger to utter disbelief. Had I really spent 3 years with such a worthless person? This is over now. How are you going to excuse yourself? No. This is. Where's your responsibility as a father? You knew our marriage wasn't just about us anymore after I got pregnant. It was a momentary lapse. I'm truly sorry. There's no way a person who strays so easily can be a fit father. Don't joke around. My rage, which had subsided for a moment, returned in full force as my husband tried to make excuses. I let out all my pent-up anger, slamming the table and yelling at John, who must have been frightened by the sight of me for the first time. He seemed frightened by this new side of me, backing away a couple of steps, hiding the divorce papers behind him. What are you hiding? Just because you're in a bad spot now doesn't mean you can back out of the divorce. I'll grant your wish and ask for child support. No, wait. It's better than being a single parent. Enough. I'd rather raise him alone than have someone like you around. He was clearly using the child as a shield now that he felt threatened. Despicable. I wouldn't let such a man claim fatherhood. My anger escalated to the point where I was almost about to lash out physically when. We're sorry for the trouble. There's no need to get more upset. We'll take responsibility for our disgraceful son and ensure he pays child support. We'll make him leave the house today and handle the rest. I managed to stop myself thanks to my in-laws' intervention. I contacted a lawyer regarding divorce procedure in front of him. He nervously looked at me. Within an hour, his belongings were packed, and he left with his parents for his new residence. Left alone in the room, I felt a sense of loss for a while, trying to calm my mind, but gradually, I started to feel relieved about the outcome. If such a man had a hand in raising my beloved son, he might have turned out as terrible as him. It was a relief that I could prevent it at an early stage. Moreover, having my in-laws on my side until the end was a stroke of luck. I felt a bit guilty about burdening them with their despicable son, but my son was my priority. They understood and took him away, for which I was immensely grateful. I immediately asked the lawyer to proceed with our divorce. Then I decided to sell the house. My ex-husband knew its location, and I couldn't risk him showing up in a fit of vengeance. Being alone with my son, I wouldn't stand a chance if my ex-husband tried something. I also wanted to erase all memories associated with him. The house, initially bought as an investment by my father, was in a prime location and sold quickly. With that money, I could live comfortably without working for a while. My plan is to stay with my parents, benefiting from their support while raising my son, at least until he's a bit older. Eventually, due to school considerations, I intend to move to the city. But that's a conversation for the future. For now, I'm focused on settling our current situation. My ex-husband, under his parents' supervision, is working hard to pay me, with his wages being managed by them. I've been meeting with my in-laws every 6 months to show them their grandchild, and during our last meeting, they told me something astonishing. What? His affair partner was someone from his company? I thought he met her at a nightclub or something. Yes, that's right. We were just as shocked. It seems like it got out at the company. Because it was an office affair, he got fired. Now he's working at a factory owned by an acquaintance. He had a somewhat senior position, so he was pretty down after getting fired, but that's irrelevant to us. I never imagined his affair partner was a junior at his workplace. It's appalling to think that someone in a leadership position could behave like that. It's clear why such a person could easily betray me and our son. After getting fired, my ex-husband John also seems to have been cut off by his affair partner. While she's also to blame, it's understandable if she resents John for getting fired. However, unlike John, she's young and has a chance to start over. My ex-husband, who is old enough, had no choice but to work at a factory that was acquainted with his parents-in-law. He's now working at a factory, with his wages being managed by his parents. They've arranged to pay child support in installments. Since his living expenses are covered by his parents, most of his salary goes to me. But what he'll do after that is anyone's guess. It's unlikely that a divorced man with no savings will remarry, and he can't even live with his child he once so desperately wanted. With no goals or purpose in life, it's clear he'll spend the rest of his days filled with regret, a fate he brought upon himself. I think he should feel the mistakes he's made throughout his life and regret it forever. A year has passed since then, and I'm still living with my parents, cherishing my son. Next week, we have our biannual dinner with my in-laws. We maintain a good relationship, and they always look forward to seeing their grandson. Despite my ex-husband being the worst, I want to keep a good relationship with my in-laws. In life, it's crucial to have people who care about you and whom you genuinely value. As for people like my ex-husband, who fit into neither category, it's best to cut ties and enjoy my life. My name is Amelia. I wasn't raised in a wealthy household, but I somehow managed to land a job and even get married. My husband's name is Edward, and he works at a luxury hotel. I really thought I was going to have a happily ever after. But I never imagined it would end up like this. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that my childhood home was below average in terms of wealth. I was brought up in such a home, but I don't hold even a speck of resentment towards my parents. They gave up all their luxuries for me, took me places to play, and taught me about the different cultures of those places. I wonder if they loved geography, but as a child, I often thought they were trying too hard for my sake. I didn't want to make my parents go through any more trouble for me. So, I decided that I would work as soon as I graduated from middle school. My mother would say to me, "You really should at least finish high school. It might be tough to find a job in the future," and my father would add, "That's right. We have enough saved to send you to high school." I was really happy about their feelings, but even more than that, I had a strong desire to make life easier for my parents as soon as possible. It's all right. The sooner I start working, the sooner I'll start earning more, I said, with little certainty. But just like my parents said, there was no guarantee that I would be able to find a job anywhere. At that time, I had a friend who was a foreign girl who had immigrated when we started middle school. Her name was Jessica, and like me, her family wasn't rich. Maybe that's why we got along so well and always played together. Since Jessica could speak some English, we managed to have conversations. Without realizing it, I was learning Spanish while talking with her. By the time I was in the 9th grade, I could hold conversations in Spanish pretty well. Perhaps it was my Spanish skills that did it, because, lo and behold, a certain travel agency decided to hire me. They saw value in my ability to speak Spanish. Jessica and I, having both left school after junior high, began working and gradually lost touch. But I was single-minded in my work, determined to earn money. As time flew by, I found myself at 26 years old. There was a lounge in a hotel that I frequently used for work. It was a high-end place, but cozy, and the snacks and coffee menu were reasonably priced. We would have our meetings there with the staff. At that time, the waiter working there was Edward. The hotel hosted many foreigners, so he seemed to speak Spanish as well. Sometimes I would be there with foreign guests too. Maybe it was because we both spoke Spanish, but something just clicked between us. Edward struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were in a whirlwind romance that led to marriage. For a girl from a poor family to get married. It's quite the deep feeling when you think about it. Regardless, I was expecting to start a new and exciting life. However, the reality turned out to be the exact opposite. When we were getting married, Edward had a request. If it's okay with you, Amelia, I'd like to live within my family home. The reason was that Edward had lost his father a few years back, and he was worried about his mother living alone. His mother's energy levels were dipping, and it seemed like a good idea to have someone watch over her soon. Plus, at the time, I was a remote worker who could do my job from home. I guess that's why Edward thought it'd be convenient, since I was always home to keep an eye on his mother and manage the household chores. On the flip side, Edward often had long hours at work and wasn't home much. With his scarce days off, having me, a home-based worker, around must have seemed like a good arrangement to him. But I couldn't immediately agree to it. That's because, when I first went to Edward's family home to introduce myself before marrying Edward, his mother had gone silent after asking about my education. Amelia, which university did you graduate from? When I honestly replied, well, I didn't go to college. I only finished middle school. My mother-in-law just looked at me in silence for a while. It was clear from her expression that she looked down on me. Oh. Only middle school? Well, she said, eyeing me with disdain. Given this history, I figured living with her wouldn't go very smoothly. So, I mentioned it to Edward casually. Edward, don't you think your mom doesn't exactly see me in the best light? When I asked, he chuckled a bit and said, nah, that's not true. Mom trusts me, and I'm sure she's got no bad feelings toward my wife either. Hearing that made me think maybe I was overthinking things. Edward also promised that if anything came up, he'd speak to his mother on my behalf. With that assurance, I agreed to move in with his family. But once I actually started living there, things were far from perfect. It was like a slap of reality. Whenever Edward and I visited his family's house, his mother would speak to him with such warmth. Edward, thank you. I'm so grateful you're living with me. And Edward would respond, of course, I knew it would help you out. From my perspective, they seemed like such a close mother and son. But towards me, my mother-in-law's attitude was completely different, cold even. Well, Amelia, just make sure you don't hold Edward back, she'd say emotionlessly, as if she was instructing a servant. It was clear she still looked down on me. I can't help but think that. But at that moment, Edward stood up for me, don't worry, Amelia is doing a great job working, too. But when I mentioned this, my mother-in-law momentarily turned stern, a detail I did not miss. I figured I should just speak to Edward if things ever got troublesome and decided to handle it my way. Thinking things would work out since we were living together. We were family, after all, and I didn't want any weird vibes between us. That's the spirit with which we started our cohabitation. But reality, as it often does, didn't quite bend in a favorable direction. Once, as I was working on my computer as usual, my mother-in-law barged into my room and said rather angrily, "Hey Amelia, when are you gonna clean my room? It needs to be done by 10 a.m. every day." I was taken aback since I had never heard of such a rule. Sure, I agreed to do household chores, but we never discussed to what extent. If she had just kindly told me from the beginning, that would have been fine. After all, I have my own job and can't be available all the time. However, arguing wouldn't be mature, so I quickly wrapped up my work, apologized, and started cleaning her room. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was just lounging in the living room, watching TV, and munching on snacks. Edward had expressed concerns about her mother's health, but she seemed well enough to clean her own room. I had imagined she might struggle with walking, but she was more sprightly than I thought. And once the cleaning was done, she was already commanding, "Now, get started on dinner, and I like it bland. I won't stand for anything too strong." She even told me to go shopping for ingredients right away. I thought it was too early to start prepping, but then figured I'd get it done and go back to my work. But when I returned from shopping, my mother-in-law was, unsurprisingly, still slacking off. It's hard not to get annoyed, but I chose to hold back and just get things done. Probably being tested by her. I believed she'd understand in time. But that hope lingered for months on end. There were days when the complaint was that I was 5 minutes late in getting the laundry in, or that the bathtub wasn't cleaned properly, nitpicking to an almost obsessive degree. Before I knew it, I ended up doing all the chores around the house. And yet, my mother-in-law just lazed around at her leisure. Honestly, if she has the energy to nitpick, she could very well do some chores herself. I started to worry that if this kept up, it'd start affecting my job, too. That was the last thing I needed, so I decided to wait until the evening to talk to Edward about it. Once my mother-in-law had gone to bed, I told him everything. "Hey, I think your mom just doesn't like me. I'm getting so tired of being constantly criticized." But Edward just chuckled and said, "Come on, that can't be true. Mom's a kind person. There won't be any issues as long as Amelia doesn't do anything strange. Please, try to get along with her." He just wouldn't believe me. Maybe it's because she's always doting on him and never complains to me. In fact, when Edward's around, my mother-in-law'd say, "Amelia, why don't you take a break and have some tea?" But even knowing that, there's a limit to my patience with this kind of life. I'm chased by household chores all day and end up having to work on my job at night. To be honest, my trust in Edward is starting to fade. If nothing changes, I might just collapse from all this stress. And then, in the midst of all this, my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Amelia, I'll be away for about a week, in about 3 months from now, so make sure you keep the house in order, okay?" She sprang this on me out of nowhere, and when I asked, "What's going on?" she said, "Edward suggested we go on an overseas vacation." That's my boy, always knowing how much I love traveling abroad. I'm looking forward to it. I was stunned. Because Edward hadn't mentioned a word of this to me. And to top it off, it sounded like I was being left out, expected to stay behind and house sit. I needed to talk to Edward about this right away, so I brought it up that night. But his response was, "Oh, Mom already told you? But you're coming too, right?" It turned out we had our wires crossed. It seems my mother-in-law had lied to me. Even if Edward wants me to go, there's no way I can enjoy a trip with her. In frustration, I told him, "I don't want to go. I can't possibly have a good time with your mother." And then Edward completely lost it and lashed out, "Amelia, what the heck are you saying? How long are you gonna keep up this childish nonsense? I won't allow you to speak ill of Mom like that. You better reflect on this. It's a vacation abroad for crying out loud, and I want to enjoy it too," he retorted. I was just shocked. I can't believe he won't trust me this far. With things like this, staying in this house has become nothing but agony for me. So, to prove to Edward that what I'm saying is true, I decided to take action the next day. Edward was off work, so the three of us were having breakfast together. That's when I challenged my mother-in-law. "You're trying to exclude me from the trip abroad, aren't you?" My mother-in-law replied with a defiant tone, "Oh, did I say that? Amelia, if you want to come, you should just come along, right?" But Edward interjected. "Hey, Amelia! Don't you get it yet? Apologize to Mom. Why are you being so defiant? You're not a child anymore." Even so, what I said was the truth. I have a stronger desire to clear everything up. I really want Edward to understand. But before I could argue back, my mother-in-law gave me the worst insult. "Well, maybe Amelia should just stay home, right? It's too early for someone like you to travel abroad. You won't appreciate the experience with your lack of education. And besides, lazing around at home every day without working. Do you even deserve to go abroad? You know it, don't you?" I was floored. To think she still believed I was unemployed. I had explained about my job even during our greetings. "I've told you what my job is, haven't I?" When I confronted her, she looked down on me. "What job? Remote work? Don't joke with me. You're just playing on the computer at home. It's been getting on my nerves every day. There's no way you're making money with that. You're just stealing Edward's earnings." She blurted that out. That really made me mad. But before I could retort, she went even further. "I have Edward, and that's enough for me. Edward can speak Spanish and works at a renowned hotel. There's no need to waste his earnings on a woman like you. Uneducated and unemployed. A bottom feeder like you should just leave as soon as possible. She just went on and on. After all her tirades, Edward must have understood what I was saying. As I looked at Edward, he made an unexpected remark. Well, I can understand how Mom feels. Maybe Amelia needs to cool off a bit, he said nonchalantly, as if he was fed up with me. At that moment, I made up my mind. I can't follow this parent and child anymore. My mother-in-law told me to get out, but I still wanted to confirm. Am I really supposed to leave? Laughing, she said, of course. Leave as soon as you can. We don't need bottom feeders like you around. So I said, understood, and started preparing to move out. I just nodded to the two of them and left the house. As I was leaving, my mother-in-law called after me with a sneer, enjoy your poor life as it suits a bottom feeder like you. But they don't realize that retribution will come upon them. About 3 months after I left the house, around the time when they were scheduled to go on their trip abroad, my mother-in-law called me. Amelia, I finally got through to you. What in the world is going on? She sounded quite frantic. But first, I said, I'm surprised you managed to call this number. She replied, of course, I tried several times and couldn't get through. I even called your parents' house to get your new number. I did tell my parents that either Edward or my mother-in-law might call. If they do, they should call back at this number. What's wrong? I asked her. In a panicked tone, she said, what's wrong? We're getting all sorts of collection letters. Help me out, I didn't know about any of this. Well, that's expected. You haven't been paying the utilities, have you? I simply answered what was expected, but my mother-in-law seemed to be in a world of her own. I had absolutely thought Edward was covering our living expenses, to find out you were paying for everything. Why didn't you tell me? I had no idea you were making that much money. It's kind of too late to be bringing this up now, but maybe Edward finally told her the truth. That's right. I had already started my own business, using the expertise I gained from the travel agency I used to work for. And now, it had grown to the point of earning $20 million, being widely accepted around the world. What shocked my mother-in-law even more was probably Edward's income. Just because he worked in a lounge at a well-known hotel doesn't mean he was raking in the cash. If anything, Edward was just an average Joe on the payroll, on the lower end, I'd say. And Spanish? That hotel is crawling with Spanish speakers. Even if he could speak it, it wasn't anything to write home about. There's no way his income could cover the living expenses for 3 people. In reality, just making ends meet for himself was all he could manage. So it's ridiculous that she hadn't realized until a collection notice came that I was the one paying all the living expenses for my husband's family. But the more I listened to my mother-in-law, the more appalling facts came to light. The reason why she insisted on me living with them wasn't to keep an eye on her. It was because she had been living off my father-in-law's wealth. But, blinded by a temporary influx of cash, she had spent lavishly until there was nothing left. That's when she turned to Edward, who she presumed was earning well. But Edward knew his income was low. And he was somewhat aware of my earnings, which is why he turned to me for help. Hearing this just reconfirmed what a hopeless pair they were. But their irresponsibility doesn't end there. By the way, are you managing to make the card payments? I asked that. Suddenly raising her voice, my mother-in-law exclaimed, exactly. Both Edward and I have bills piling up. Since I moved in with them, I've started to receive more and more credit card statements addressed to both of them. The amounts due each month kept climbing, and before I knew it, they amounted to quite a sum. The level of their luxury spending was beyond me. I have no idea what they were doing without paying the living expenses, but for sure, Edward's bills had surpassed his salary. And my mother-in-law hadn't kicked her old habits of lavish spending. It seemed they both had gotten themselves into debt, now totaling over $40,000. And what's more shocking is they thought Edward would somehow manage it, if it was just a bit of debt, as my mother-in-law put it, and Edward thought Amelia would take care of it if things got tough. The level of dependency in grown adults was appalling. Beyond exasperation, I was starting to feel the danger. So, when my mother-in-law brazenly said, "So, Amelia, you can sort this out for us, right?" I was astonished she could be so audacious. I made it clear to her. "After all that's been said and done, you're asking for help now? There's no way I'm helping." That's when Edward suddenly took the phone. "Hey Amelia. You're my wife, you have a duty to help us out. Do something, we can't pay this off." I couldn't fathom their nerve. But I did offer him a glimmer of mercy. "So, you want to come over? I might consider it if you do." He was immediately enthusiastic. "Oh yeah? You'll let us stay, and you'll sort out the money? Then let's do that. Where's your place? I'll head there right now." He was so eager, I had to be honest. "Well, if you can make it." "I'm in Hawaii right now. I have a vacation home here," I said. Both Edward and my mother-in-law couldn't hide their shock. "What do you mean, Hawaii? We can't afford to go there right now." Edward panicked. I calmly replied, "Huh? Weren't you gonna travel abroad? Just swing by Hawaii. Your mother would love it. And you did ask my family for my phone number, right? Didn't you realize it was an international number?" I added, "Oh, and don't forget the cost of this call. It adds up if you're on for a long time." And to drive the point home, I said, "If we get divorced, I might think about helping with the money." To that, Edward was quick to reply, "All right. I got it. Let's just get divorced first then." Seems he had realized his debts were not something he could exchange for anything. So, I told him I'd deliver the divorce papers once I got back to California and ended the call. Was it about a week later? I had returned to California, made sure to have the divorce papers properly written up, and the divorce went through without a hitch. Edward looked quite gaunt, so I guess he's been living pretty lean these last few days. But he mentioned something at that time. Turns out, he had been counting on my money for the overseas trip as well. Hearing that didn't even surprise me anymore. They probably thought I would pay off their debts. But of course, I had no intention whatsoever of doing that. What I proposed was, first of all, for both of them to stop living so lavishly. And then, for Edward and my mother-in-law to work their tails off. I told them if they did, they could eventually pay off the debt and at least manage the bare necessities. When Edward heard this, he lashed out, "Hey, that's not what you promised. You were supposed to think about the debt." But I was like, "That's why I did you a favor, by thinking of a way for you guys to handle your debt repayment. So, good luck. Once you can afford to travel abroad again, I'll invite you to my Hawaii villa," I said with a touch of sarcasm, and left their place. Afterward, they both seemed to be working themselves to the bone from dawn till dusk, barely scraping by. It's probably a good lesson for them, since they've had it easy until now. On a different note, I heard that Jessica also built a house in Hawaii, and I had a reunion with her after so long. She took up a job that took her around the world after graduating middle school and now seems to be a company president just like me. She had her parents come over to the house she bought and they are living it up together. So, I called my parents over from California and we started living here. Now, I sometimes visit Jessica's place. We both feel blessed to be able to give back to our parents, and we encourage each other as we work hard at our jobs. Looks like a limited edition accessory. Why does my younger sister-in-law have something like this? More importantly, respect your own sister over some other woman, you stupid brother. On the day of the wedding, during the spare time before the ceremony, I tried to calm my nerves by watching my cat through a pet camera. However, what the pet camera showed was not my beloved cat, but my dolled-up sister-in-law who was attending our wedding. Unaware of the pet camera in the room, she was freely rummaging through my personal belongings. When I showed this to my husband, He blew up like a hot water heater and charged into the room where his relatives were waiting. Broadcasting the live footage to the entire family, my sister-in-law was caught humming a tune while voicing her grievances about my husband and trying on my personal items. Upon seeing her outrageous behavior, my in-laws turned pale and rushed out in a hurry. Minutes later, a devastating comeuppance was in store for my sister-in-law, who thought she had not been caught and took bold actions. I have been working at the company I joined in my final year of university for 3 years. About 2 years after I started working, a male colleague, whom I began to regard as more than a friend, confessed his desire for a serious relationship with the intent of marriage. I accepted his proposal without hesitation. A year has passed since then, and we are now in full swing preparing for marriage. Our new home is located not far from my in-laws' place, and with the pretext of a wedding gift, both our parents contributed little by little, and we bought a pre-owned single-family home. The remaining amount of the purchase price was covered by a mortgage, but since both my husband and in-laws agreed I should keep working post-marriage, we were optimistic that working together would allow us to pay it off sooner. There was a reason for choosing a single-family home. I have an extraordinary love for cats, and I lived surrounded by several cats at my parents' home. When I decided to attend a university in another state and had to live alone, of course, I never considered parting from my cats. My parents strongly opposed me taking a cat with me to live alone, but I persuaded them by saying I would work part-time and take responsibility for it. In the end, I was only able to bring one cat from my parents' home, but I pride myself on not letting my cat feel deprived while I balanced my studies and part-time work. After graduation, I continued to live in the same pet-friendly apartment, but post-marriage, it was undeniable that the apartment was too small. I was very sad at the thought of possibly having to return my cat to my parents' house. To me, cats are almost like soulmates. Having my dear cat with me has allowed me to endure tough exams and overcome the loneliness of living alone for the first time. My husband was aware of my passion for cats even before we started dating, so he was okay with keeping a cat. However, it was challenging to find a pet-friendly apartment or condo. Finding a small space suitable for a single person wasn't too hard, but considering 2 adults and the possibility of children in the future, along with rent considerations, the search was proving difficult. One day, when we went to my in-laws' house for wedding introductions, I hit it off with my mother-in-law over our love of cats. My mother-in-law, though an in-law herself, was a local like my in-laws, so I thought she might have information on pet-friendly rentals and consulted with her. She was thrilled at the prospect of living with a cat and suggested, with much excitement, "Why don't you just buy a single-family home?" As it turns out, my mother-in-law loves cats and lived with them before marrying, but had to give up cohabiting with them after discovering my father-in-law's cat allergy. With this background and perhaps feeling a bit guilty, my father-in-law didn't argue against the idea and decided to help fund our home purchase. It didn't seem fair to rely only on my in-laws, so when I explained the situation to my parents, they offered to help for the sake of the cat. My father kept insisting it was strictly for the cat's benefit, but my mother told me, "He's just shy. Don't worry about it, it's a wedding gift," and shared a knowing smile. My dad has always been shy about expressing his true feelings, and it's not like he needed to be shy at a time like this, so my mother and I couldn't help but laugh together. Thus, with the help of our parents, we were able to settle on our new home much sooner than expected, and we decided to move before the wedding. My mother-in-law, who adores cats, is still in her youthful 50s. She works part-time on some days, takes up hobbies, and like clockwork, rejuvenates herself monthly at a cat cafe. Seeing how she's that kind of person, I thought our cat would warm up to her in no time. So I quickly invited her over to our new place, and to my surprise, our cat took to her more than I imagined, and she seemed to have a blast. Ever since then, she's been visiting frequently not just to play with the cat but also to share long-lasting recipes and secretly spill the beans on my husband's favorite dishes. She really goes out of her way, and it has made my relationship with her very good. My husband and I are already living together in our new home, so it feels like married life has already started, even though the wedding is still ahead. We work at the same company, but once our marriage was decided, my husband got transferred to another department. It seems he had already requested a transfer, so he's pretty pumped about moving to the department he wanted. Our work start times are the same, but we come home at different hours. Whoever gets home first starts preparing dinner, and I think we're doing quite well at splitting the household chores down the middle. During the commute, my husband often reads the newspaper because of his job, while I've made it a routine to check on our cat through the pet camera I installed at home. Even in the crowded train, getting soothed by my cat cuts my stress in half. It's just one good thing after another. The conversation might jump around a bit, but when I went to my husband's family home to formally introduce myself, the in-laws weren't the only ones I met for the first time. I had heard about his unmarried sister since we started dating. My sister-in-law is quite the free spirit, with a passion for international travel. Instead of holding down a regular job, she does various part-time gigs to save up for her trips. Seems like she's living the dream. I always thought it was great to have passions, and folks with their own interests tend to respect each other's and get along just fine. So her not having a 9-to-5 or being spontaneous wasn't a big deal to me. Truth be told, my own decision to work full-time was largely to keep up a lifestyle surrounded by cats. And the appeal of having paid leave in case something happened to them was not lost on me. You don't usually get that with part-time jobs. I'm pretty keen on traveling myself. Back when I lived at home, I went on a few international family trips. Learning about unknown worlds is always a plus, and I figured I'd get along with my sister-in-law just fine. My husband, however, gave me an earful about how naive my thinking was. He vented about all the troubles he's had because of her. Like how his money would magically shrink, or how she'd dip into the savings he'd built up from his own part-time work. Thinking his piggy bank was too vulnerable, he had his folks set him up with his own bank account. But even then, it seemed she'd somehow withdraw from it without his consent. Back in the day, he used easy-to-remember pins, which pretty much gave her free rein. He said it felt just like being robbed. He was pretty steamed up, maybe reliving those emotions, because she also had a habit of using and breaking his stuff without asking. They seemed to be on pretty bad terms. There didn't seem to be any lies in my husband's side of the story, and it didn't sound exaggerated, but I didn't want to take sides and sour my relationship with my sister-in-law before it even started. While I nodded along with my husband, inside, I was reminding myself to stay neutral. But, boy, the sister-in-law I met was nothing like the picture my husband painted. She was something else entirely. After the introductions and self-introductions were done, and we began to dig deeper over dinner with the in-laws, she started talking about her hobbies and was super easy to talk to. Despite the friction with my husband, I felt as a fellow woman, we could make it work. She's in her early 30s but seems to see the world through rose-colored glasses, probably due to her carefree lifestyle. Then again, some people don't show their true selves and put on a facade. Was she on guard around me? Or was she playing up the unreliable angle out of consideration? That's what I was thinking. However, as the warm and friendly atmosphere of the gathering reached its later stages, my in-laws formally addressed the start of our family relations with words of encouragement. My mother-in-law, drawing from her experience, mentioned that it's tough to balance work and unfamiliar household chores, so she encouraged us to support each other. Ever since my husband decided to support my career continuation, he confidently assured that he could handle the household chores, having learned the ropes from his mother, who in turn was a bit worried and asked, "Really? If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask," they said, and the meet and greet for our wedding should have ended on a good note. That is, until my sister-in-law, oblivious to the mood, chimed in. "Both of you working means you'll be rolling in dough, right? You'll be saving up for a rainy day, huh? If I end up single and an old lady, you'll use that savings to take care of me, right? So, if I never marry, you guys have got my back," she said. The idea was that we should manage on my husband's salary alone, and save my entire paycheck so that if my sister-in-law never married and became elderly, we would use that money to support her. I was stunned. It took me a moment to comprehend what she had said, and I was at a loss for words. But my husband instantly got it. "Are you kidding me? Why should we care about your retirement when you've chosen to live your life without planning for it? He snapped back. He made it clear that her disrespectful comment was none of our business and firmly put her in her place. The in-laws, too, were too flustered to laugh off such a remark and sent her out of the room, apologizing to us for her rudeness. After this incident, I consciously avoided any interaction with my sister-in-law. I believe everyone is free to choose their own path in life. But who would ask someone they've only met for a few hours to take care of them in their old age? Considering what my husband told me about his sister using his money and wages from his part-time jobs at will, I now felt she was targeting my income. She seemed all too eager to come to us with her hands out, and I couldn't bring myself to like her. She easily trampled over my intention to bridge the gap and get along well. Even if she said it was just a joke to lighten the mood, the atmosphere had already been pleasant, and such a tasteless joke isn't funny. She was just an immature child who couldn't read the room. Even after her outrageous outburst, I arranged to visit my in-laws' home when I knew my sister-in-law would be out working part-time. Thus, from the time of our initial meeting until the day of our wedding, I never saw her face again. Until the very end, my husband refused to let his sister attend the wedding. I understood his feelings, as I too didn't want any strange outbursts or behavior at our wedding. However, worried about what she might do if she wasn't invited, I convinced my husband that it would be better to have her there under someone's watchful eye. He reluctantly agreed to my suggestion. Frankly, I was also nervous about what she might do in front of my parents, relatives, and friends. The in-laws said they'd keep a close eye on her, so I had to trust that. But my sister-in-law managed to mess everything up with her outrageous actions. It wasn't just about us anymore. She had created a situation that involved the in-laws and all the relatives. After my husband and I arrived at the venue and changed in our respective dressing rooms, he came to mine. He was in a light-colored vest and morning suit, while I wore a white wedding dress that showed off my shoulders and back. The dress and veil were too long for me to move around on my own. It would be selfish of me to ask him to stay because I felt lonely since he had greetings to make with his work colleagues. So I was really happy when he came to my dressing room. The time until the start of the wedding ceremony also served as a solid time filler for me. It's not so much killing time, it has become a part of my daily routine. That meant checking on our beloved cat through the pet camera and getting that warm, fuzzy feeling. When my husband came in, I was just about to look through the camera on my phone. He had become quite the cat lover since we started living with one. "Do you want to watch together?" I asked, and he told me to go ahead. Apparently, he wasn't used to the morning suits he was wearing, and it seemed like that was the least of his concerns. Taking advantage of my husband's kindness, I peeked into the pet camera, but what was displayed was not my beloved cat, but my sister-in-law. We had received a message from my mother-in-law while we were moving to the venue. The gist of it was that she was going to bring my sister-in-law to the venue now. We had agreed to keep each other posted so my sister-in-law wouldn't cause trouble for other guests. My mother-in-law had assured us that since they were driving, there'd be no unsupervised actions, so we were at ease, but what was this all about? I called out to my husband loudly. At that moment, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, my husband naively remarked that I didn't need to shout to be heard. But he was speechless after seeing the live feed from the pet camera. Uncharacteristically, he let out a few expletives. It was clear his anger was too intense to contain. Then he spun on his heel and stormed out of the dressing room. I followed him in a hurry. Considering I was likely to trip in my heels, I kicked them off. Even if it looked undignified, I took off the meticulously set veil and boldly lifted the hem of my dress to run. My husband headed straight into the family's waiting room. To give the out-of-town family a comfortable place to rest, instead of the usual waiting room, a room spacious enough for a small banquet had been prepared. Thanks to its size, the room came with a large installed screen. When I caught up to my husband, the entire family was taken aback, not understanding his actions. He was saying something to his parents, but his anger was so intense that the subject of his sentences was missing. Noticing I had caught up, he asked to borrow my smartphone. With my phone, He projected the live feed from the pet camera onto the big screen and turned up the volume so everyone in the corner could hear. The screen showed my sister-in-law humming a tune while rummaging around the room. At first, my husband's relatives thought it was some kind of skit, watching her behavior with dismay. There were even some murmurs of exasperation about how she had always been one to do outrageous things. But the moment my sister-in-law began to rant about my husband to the tune of her humming, the atmosphere in the room turned icy. "He's shutting out his own sister. What's up with that guy? Having tea with my sister-in-law isn't such a big deal, right?" Of course, the tabs on my gainfully employed sister-in-law. She also said, "Remember when my brother gave his wife that fancy engagement ring? And sometimes he buys trendy jewelry. I bet that was all for me." Muttering to herself that I shouldn't need the accessories I used to wear when I was single, my sister-in-law meticulously rummaged through my dresser. She even said she'd cash in anything that didn't suit her or looked valuable. I had given my mother-in-law a spare key so she could play with the cat anytime. Knowing this, my sister-in-law, who had been banned from our house, took advantage of my mother-in-law's absence during the wedding to sneak in and look for valuables. Upon understanding the situation, my in-laws immediately stood up, their faces pale, and apologized to me. When we got to the venue, my sister-in-law excused herself to use the restroom. Regardless of whether my sister-in-law needed to be watched all the way to the restroom, anyone would think that if you bring someone to a venue, they would behave. My husband and I, along with my in-laws, never thought my sister-in-law would do something so drastic as to head to the venue. We assumed we'd be notified when she arrived. Who would have thought that on the very day of her own brother's wedding, she would sneak into our house to commit theft? My in-laws did apologize again, emphasizing that stopping my sister-in-law's actions was the priority, and with that, my father-in-law sprinted out of the waiting room. My mother-in-law followed him. The relatives on my husband's side seemed unable to grasp the situation. Maybe they were struggling to organize their feelings, terrified that a criminal might emerge from the family. Oblivious to the relatives' awareness, my sister-in-law, upon finding branded accessories in my dresser, tried them on, checking herself in the mirror with a satisfied smile and even checking their resale value on her phone. The relatives left in the waiting room began to grumble complaints about my sister-in-law's behavior and their growing distrust towards the in-laws who had raised her. They questioned the upbringing, suggesting that being a freeloader and single past 30 led to this behavior. Regarding this, I think it's questionable whether my husband should apologize. From the beginning, he doesn't care about the opinions of relatives, and it seems he is thinking about how to make his sister atone for her foolish actions. I could tell he was desperately trying to control his anger as he clenched his fist over and over. I felt anger and disbelief, but I was convinced that my sister-in-law and I were fundamentally different people. Talking to a person like that is just a waste of time. Even if they suffer a setback, they'll just sleep it off and completely forget about it by the next day. They don't learn from their mistakes nor have any intention of growing. They're nothing but the dregs of society, only capable of thinking about how to get through life the easy way. I swore that even if my husband or in-laws groveled and begged me for forgiveness, I would never let her in. But I doubt my husband would want that anyway. About 10 minutes after the in-laws had stormed out, the live video took a dramatic turn. As my sister-in-law was engrossed in her search, my father-in-law lunged into the room. Before she could turn around at the sound of the door swinging open, she was suddenly grabbed from behind, completely taken aback. "What are you doing here in my son and daughter-in-law's home, which you're banned from?" Her face was clearly shaken. Our new home wasn't equipped with security measures. It seemed like she had done her homework, knowing this. She must have found a way to snoop around without the in-laws' watchful eyes, knowing well enough that my mother-in-law had a spare key. But it looked like she hadn't thought about what would happen if she got caught. She was stumbling over her words, trying to make excuses. I was asked by my sister-in-law. "Look, I even found the jewelry as proof, right?" Then, trailing behind, my mother-in-law entered the room. Holding a smartphone, she loudly exclaimed that she had to report the illegal entry to the police. "Why would I ask you, someone who's banned?" And why are you wearing the jewelry that you claim she asked for? My sister-in-law's weak excuses were met with solid arguments from my mother-in-law, and as my sister-in-law looked for a chance to escape, my father-in-law pinned her down with his full weight. She was complaining that she was in pain, that she would suffocate to death, but my father-in-law firmly told her that if she had the strength to shout, she wasn't going to die. Right then, the police arrived, having been notified. My sister-in-law was taken away as a trespasser, but she kept resisting, repeating, "Just because I entered a family member's home, that's trespassing? Are the police here idiots?" My mother-in-law informed her that all the evidence was there, and that the entire family had seen it happen in real time, revealing the existence of the pet camera. When my sister-in-law saw the bedroom camera, she seemed to admit her defeat and was quietly led away by the police. I breathed a sigh of relief at that sight. I hadn't thought the in-laws would hand her over to the police, but I was grateful that they imposed a proper sanction. Yet, the fact that the criminal act of a real sister was exposed made it complicated to feel simply happy about it. Even if they hated each other and didn't get along, they were still siblings, and I believed that he must have his own thoughts about it. The relatives' room on my husband's side was in uproar. To think that a criminal had emerged from the family, some were disappointed, while others openly expressed their anger as a disgrace to the family. Amidst this, the in-laws who had handed my sister-in-law over to the police returned. Naturally, the wedding could not proceed under these circumstances and was, of course, cancelled. There were people who had traveled long distances to celebrate with us, and others who had finally managed to clear their schedules to be there. Feelings of regret and a wish for understanding intermingled within me. My in-laws quickly sensed how I felt and repeatedly bowed their heads to us, apologizing for the turn of events. The mother-in-law blamed herself for not keeping a better eye on her daughter, apologizing to us repeatedly. She also stood silently, taking in the furious remarks from the entire family, for having brought such a disgrace upon them, and kept apologizing endlessly. Having heard that the groom's side was in chaos, my parents, worried, peeked into the room. Seeing the in-laws apologizing to the groom's family, they realized something was seriously wrong and asked me for an explanation. I could say that my sister-in-law had broken into our new home to steal, but I didn't know how much they would believe. Then, noticing my parents were there, my in-laws came over and, without any explanation, apologized to my parents. When the in-laws revealed what their daughter had done, my parents' expressions grew complicated. My husband knew his sister had issues, but he had no idea she was this foolish. Along with his parents, he apologized to mine. Despite him being a victim too. But neither my parents nor I could simply say don't worry about it, and a heavy, indescribable silence hung in the air. After gathering their thoughts, my parents said they'd leave future decisions up to us, but they did agree to cancel the wedding, and for the time being, that settled things. Later on, my sister-in-law got off with just a fine because it was her first offense and she hadn't actually stolen anything. If she had been caught after rifling through the new house, theft would have been added to her charges, and she wouldn't have gotten off with just a fine. My husband bitterly said she should have been arrested for theft and spent some time in jail. I was slightly in agreement, not wanting anything to do with her going forward. Though my sister-in-law got off with a fine, she now had a criminal record, and the in-laws severely scolded her for breaking into someone's house while they were away, even if she was family. My daughter would know right from wrong well past the age of 30. My father-in-law raged to the point I thought his veins might pop, and I heard he disowned her right then and there. She had to pay for all wedding-related expenses, including those incurred from the cancellation. My sister-in-law, who had blown through all her part-time job earnings, was forced to borrow from every lender out there to cover the costs. Of course, some lenders were reputable while others were shady, skirting the edges of the law, and now she faced a future of hard work and being hounded by debt collectors. Unable to accept this series of events, my sister-in-law took to social media to vent her frustrations and seek validation, but instead, she ignited a firestorm of criticism. Her photo, real name, and criminal record were spread all over the internet, and a search would bring up those details. She later deleted her posts, but someone had saved the logs, and her rants never really disappeared from the internet. Even when she created new social media accounts, she was quickly found out, ensuring that her criminal past would follow her. She was fired from her previous part-time job because having a criminal worked there could tarnish the establishment's reputation, and she was let go from other jobs after being outed by coworkers who knew of her infamy. She's currently scraping by, working in physically demanding jobs like construction, barely making her debt payments. It's said that resuming her hobby of traveling abroad is almost impossible now. After all that settled down, we had a small, intimate wedding with just close friends and family. It was a DIY wedding with colleagues and friends, but it was filled with love and will be a cherished memory for life. We've adopted a new cat and are spending our happy days surrounded by the kitty and kind-hearted people. I work for a big corporation, so I'll work for both of us, no worries. That's what Tom said when we were engaged, but as soon as we got married, he completely changed. He and his son, Mike, started hurling verbal abuse at me every day. On top of that, he took control of our finances, skimping on household expenses. He would complain about every meal I cooked, even though he asked me to make them. Fed up, I declared divorce to Tom and left the house. Then one day, I ran into Mike by chance. "Hey! I heard you're on welfare now." I was taken aback. "What? You must be mistaking me for someone else." He smirked. "Come on, don't try to pretend." Mike twisted his mouth into a sneer. "Listen, you and I are done. Don't come crying to me about being broke, 'cause I'm not lending you a dime. Remember that." Before I could retort, he had vanished into the crowd. Feeling the stares of passers-by, I hung my head and shook my shoulders. I couldn't help but laugh. Poor thing. He doesn't know anything. I can't wait to see his reaction when he finds out the truth. I'm Susan, a 50-year-old housewife. I married Tom 5 years ago. When we first met, he seemed like a perfect gentleman. We met at a gathering of mutual acquaintances, and he was fun to talk to, very friendly, and seemed really nice. As we were parting, he said, "I'd like to meet just the two of us next time." I was feeling sad about saying goodbye, so I agreed. When we started dating, I learned he had a son named Mike from his previous marriage. Mike was in 5th grade then, and I had dinner with him a few times. He was a bright and nice kid, just like his father. A year later, Tom proposed to me, and I decided to open up to him. I work part-time and live with my parents, right? Actually, the company I joined right out of college was a nightmare, and it wrecked my health. Is that so? He said. It was tough even quitting. I don't think I can work long hours anymore. Then Tom smiled kindly. Just stay at home without overdoing it. Look, I work for a big corporation. I'll work for both of us, no worries. Comforted by his words, I accepted his proposal. I truly thought I had found a good man and looked forward to a happy married life. Little did I know, in less than 6 months, I'd face utter despair. As we got used to living as a family of 3, Tom and Mike's behavior took a drastic turn. They started criticizing and mocking everything I said or did. Mom's bedridden again? What about my lunch? One morning, Mike came to my bedroom, frowning in displeasure. I had fallen ill after participating in a community event at a local church the day before. It was an unseasonably hot day, and I wasn't feeling well, so I had asked Tom to help, but he refused with an annoyed look. Must be nice to be a stay-at-home mom. You can slack off all year. It's my rare day off, let me rest. I understand. Pushing myself to attend had resulted in being unable to get up the next morning. I'm sorry, Mike. I couldn't prepare your lunch, so please buy something from Walmart. As I handed him the money, Mike grumbled discontentedly. Mom, can't you at least make a decent lunch? You're always taking shortcuts with frozen stuff or leftovers from dinner. His words stung me deeply. Don't blame your mom, Mike. Tom chimed in, passing by in the hallway with a half-smirk. With the effort she's saving on lunch, I bet dinner's gonna be extravagant. Ah, right. Should I expect something fancy like roast beef, or maybe crab and salmon roe shipped directly from Maine? I'm looking forward to it. As a full-time housewife, you've got plenty of time to spare for dinner, right? You're not sleeping all afternoon, I hope. And make sure to do the house cleaning thoroughly, no slacking off. Both of them chuckled at my exhausted state, threw out their unreasonable lines, and left. There's no way I can prepare such a luxurious meal. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and let out a heavy sigh. The reason is simple: Tom is incredibly stingy. Despite being a department head in a major corporation and earning a substantial salary, the allowance he gives me is ridiculously meager. It's my salary, so why should I let my wife manage it? He argued after we got married. I didn't oppose him, quietly complying. I believed that as long as the household finances were managed properly, it didn't matter who was in charge. Then, Tom started spending money recklessly. It's necessary for work. Social drinking is a business expense. It's essential. While he splurges on expensive clothes and watches for himself, he makes a fuss even if I spend $1 on a snack. Insisting that a housewife doesn't need pocket money, I have to report to Tom and get permission for every expense, whether it's a trip to the salon or buying clothes. One pair of jeans should be enough, right? You're buying another one? I need a warm one for winter. Fine, but buy it cheap. And I want to get a haircut. Can I go to the salon every 2 months to maintain my hairstyle? Huh? What's the point of you dressing up? Keep your long hair as it is, then you only need a haircut every 6 months. I won't allow it. So, I'm only allowed to buy cheap makeup from dollar stores. Even when I plead to change to better products because my skin is getting rough, he doesn't listen. Furthermore, the household budget he gives me is a third of the average. No wonder our nutrition is unbalanced. When I complained, Tom just shrugged it off. They managed with this amount on that TV budgeting show. But that lady's family owned a farm, and she got vegetables and rice from them. It's impossible with the high cost of living here. Managing that is your job, isn't it? I was frustrated not just by his stinginess with the household budget, but also by his attitude towards my father's funeral contribution. When my father, who had been ill, passed away, Tom blatantly showed his reluctance. We don't need to give a funeral contribution, right? Anyone attending the funeral, other than the immediate family, gives a contribution. Then use your savings. I'm not involved. He said this to me, tear-streaked and preparing for the funeral in my mourning clothes. His complete lack of consideration for me infuriated me. I don't intend to ask for your contribution, so don't worry. Good. But wait, do Mike and I really have to go? It's going to ruin our long weekend. Such a drag. Really, Dad? I was planning to play a new video game. Though they complained, I never doubted they would attend. However, when Tom and Mike finally showed up late, they didn't greet my mother or relatives. My exhausted mother didn't have the energy to criticize them, but my relatives were furious. What's Tom thinking? It's too cold-hearted for his father-in-law's funeral. And Mike, after receiving so many gifts and money from your father. I apologized profusely to my relatives, feeling my affection for them rapidly cooling. Tom, in his stylish suits, and Mike, attending a prestigious private university, were popular in the neighborhood as a handsome father-son duo. But at home, they did nothing but spew verbal abuse at me. Instead of coming straight home after work or school, they'd wander around, returning with the scent of lipstick and perfume. While they did whatever they pleased, they treated me like a maid, demanding luxurious meals despite the meager food budget. Recently, when I served dishes made with chicken or pork, Mike and Tom would glare at me disdainfully and lash out. Don't you want to serve a good meal to a husband who's been working all day? If I get sick eating this poor man's food, how are you going to take responsibility? Call yourself a mother? I can make tasty meals even with chicken or pork. And if you're picky about eating vegetables and fish, you'll end up ruining your health. We're saying we'd eat it if it was high-end seafood. Stop yapping if you can't satisfy us with your cooking. I don't need to be lectured by you. They used to eat despite complaining, but recently they've started leaving food untouched. Yet, if I don't cook, they berate me for slacking off as a wife. It's such a waste, so I end up eating it for breakfast or lunch the next day, wondering whom I'm cooking for as tears well up in my eyes. As for their meals, they get by with store-bought lunches, ramen noodles, and snack foods. Eventually, Tom was diagnosed as pre-diabetic during a company health check, and Mike started gaining weight. It was a predictable outcome. Then, they lashed out at me. How dare you, as a wife, make your husband and son sick? We don't need a useless woman like you. Let's get a divorce. Then, I'll leave. I agreed readily, which took them by surprise. Are you okay with that, being jobless? You've been living off me, how will you survive now? Don't worry about me. I'll sign the divorce papers later and send them to you. Just leave my stuff until the movers come to pick it up. Nobody's gonna take your junk. Tom sneered. Ah, you'll regret leaving a handsome, high-earning guy like me. You won't find another kind husband who'd let you be a housewife with 3 meals and naps. Right. You've been living in luxury off Dad's money. You'll struggle now. While I packed my clothes in a suitcase, Tom and Mike kept ranting. I envied how highly Tom thought of himself. During our dating days, this overconfidence seemed shining and confident. You're going back to your mom's, right? Say hi to her living on her pension. You too will be living the poor life. Hey Mike, I bet they'll end up on welfare. Tom's prediction made Mike laugh out loud. You already reek of poverty. Combined with Grandma, they'll be the ultimate pair. The recent funeral was so stingy, it felt like poverty was seeping in. I thought the same. Call it a family funeral or a poor man's funeral. I want a grand event, Mike. Got it, Dad. But for us, poverty's like a different world, with Dad in a major corporation and me at a prestigious university. I was boiling with anger at their audacity, but realized it was pointless to react and let it all slide. Returning home, I confided in my mom, who lowered her voice. I sensed something was off with Tom and Mike at the funeral. But I didn't want to intrude too much into my daughter's family. Plus, with your father's illness, I know you couldn't speak up. I'm sorry for suddenly showing up. It's fine. I've been lonely without someone to talk to. Why don't you stay here? Thanks, but once I get my job on track, I'm planning to move to an apartment. While I appreciated my mom's concern, living together might make me too dependent. Living nearby and visiting occasionally seemed the right balance. Tom and Mike mocked me for being jobless, but in reality, I'd been working from home. It all started with my budget cooking blog. Receiving many positive comments, I boldly launched a cooking website, which quickly gained a readership and became popular online. Then, an editor from a major publishing house approached me, and now I'm slowly preparing to publish a cookbook. Thanks to this, I've been too busy to dwell on the divorce, and days flew by. One day, my phone rang incessantly. Pausing from stir-frying ingredients, I answered. Hello? Hey! What's this about alimony? I sighed, expecting this topic. You and Mike hurled enough abuse at me, didn't you? Oh, I thought, never mind. Relief in his voice, Tom abruptly continued. I haven't cheated on you or anything. Wait, did you record our verbal abuse? Your memory alone won't cut it. I've noted everything in a journal in detail. Try filing for alimony then. Poor people always talk about money. Let's see if you can actually get it. Tom snapped and hung up the phone. After finishing cooking, I went to a private investigator and requested an investigation into Tom's behavior. Soon, his affair with a coworker was uncovered. The day after I sent photos and the investigation report to his company, Tom called me again. You're so low, exposing it to my company. My furious manager reported it to the higher-ups, and now I'm fired. Oh, wasn't the woman his daughter? You should have known better than to have an affair, given how strict they are about such matters. I chuckled. But you must be fine, right? You are so stingy with living expenses, you must have plenty of savings. I bet you and Mike are living it up. Mike moved into a dorm for his college this spring because commuting was tough. Damn, with the prepaid dorm fees and the mortgage, it's a lot. My savings got drained by that woman. She was two-timing me with a younger guy. Sounds tough. But that's none of my business. Oh, and about my alimony, plus half the value of the apartment for property division, please transfer it to my account once the claim arrives. Tom was ranting over the phone, but I hung up without bothering. A few days later, while returning from shopping downtown, I bumped into Mike. Dressed in flashy fashion, with multiple piercings and blonde hair, he was noticeable from afar. Spotting me, he raised his hand in greeting. "Hey, I heard you're on welfare now." I was surprised. "What? You're mistaking me for someone else." "Don't pretend," Mike said with a twisted smile. "Any jobless old lady like you would end up there. If you had just obeyed Dad and me, you could still be living comfortably." "It's pathetic," I retorted. "Receiving welfare is a citizen's right. We could all need it someday due to illness or accidents. It's wrong to look down on it." Yeah. "So, you're getting it too, huh?" Ignoring his smirk, Mike pointed his finger at me. "Listen, you and I are done. Don't come begging to me, I won't lend you a penny. Remember that." Just as I was about to retort, he turned his back and disappeared into the crowd. I bowed my head and trembled my shoulders, feeling the stares of passers-by. I couldn't help it, the situation was too absurd, and I couldn't suppress my laughter. Poor thing, he knows nothing. I'm curious to see his reaction when he finds out the truth. A few days later, waking up, I found a ridiculous number of missed calls from Mike. Reluctantly calling back, he yelled furiously. "You tricked me." "What are you talking about?" "I heard from my cousin. You got 3 luxury condos from Grandpa's inheritance and are living comfortably. Hiding that during the divorce is low." "My personal assets. Why should I tell you or Tom?" "It's marital property. You should have divided it with Dad." "Too bad, it became mine after the divorce proceedings. So I can't give it to Tom." I had known it was mine by my father's will, but I delayed the proceedings to avoid sharing with Tom. Mike then raged. "You're rich and still getting welfare? I'm reporting you to the authorities right now." "Feel free. The one getting it is Tom, though." Mike fell silent. "What?" "I told you, it's not me. Are you listening?" I explained it like talking to a child. To be honest, even without the inheritance, I can live well. I have income from my cooking website and book sales, which I started secretly. But Tom spent all his money on his affair and has many debts. After being fired, he has no income. "Mike, are you there?" "Dad's on welfare." "No way." I pulled the phone away from my ear as Mike screamed. Waiting for him to calm down, I continued the conversation. "You really haven't heard, have you? Tom's too proud to tell his son. A relative who Tom asked for money told me that he was evicted for not paying his apartment rent and now he's unemployed, holed up in a rundown apartment. If you're worried, why don't you reach out to him?" For a while, there was silence on the other end of the phone. After a few minutes, Mike spoke resentfully. "You're cold. After all Dad did for you, don't you feel any gratitude? You have money, you should give it to him." "Why should I? Ever since we got married, it's been nothing but unpleasant. I don't feel indebted to him." I responded coolly. "If you're so concerned, why don't you lend him money? You have a job. I don't have any savings. The money from my job, well, it goes to hanging out with friends." Mike's tone faltered, and I smirked. "You've been partying quite lavishly. As a student, you shouldn't be borrowing money to go to clubs." "How did you know that?" "I saw you across the street the other day, right after we parted. You met up with a club hostess and went into a luxury store. Plus, I found a club membership card at home." and using my credit card without permission is out of the question. Mike stumbled over his words, trembling. It's unfair. You got all those fancy condos from Grandpa and Dad, and I got nothing. This is discrimination. Okay. The bill for the credit card is coming soon, so make sure you pay it. The call ended before I finished speaking. I sighed and ended the call as well. I thought it was over, but a few months later, Tom and Mike showed up unannounced at my parents' house. When the doorbell rang persistently, I answered the intercom to find them there. Expecting they had come to borrow money, I let them into the house to avoid causing a scene outside. Tom and Mike's appearance had drastically changed from their once stylish looks to worn shirts and dirty pants. Their eyes lacked vitality, and they looked haggard. Yet they still had the energy to be sarcastic. Upon entering the living room, Tom looked around and sneered. Same old shabby house. Why don't you sell those condos and rebuild this place? Do something nice for your mother living on a meager pension. This is the house of Dad's memories, so it's fine as is. More importantly, when are you two going to pay back the money? You're past the deadline. Tom lifted his chin and arrogantly proposed. Susan, I'll forgive you now. So let's remarry. What? You started a cooking site, right? If you can handle the housework perfectly, I'll even let you work. So come back. Being kind enough to forgive a wife who abandoned her husband and child, Dad's generous. So, Mom, why don't you live with Dad again? It must be insecure for two women living alone. I was speechless. Then rage surged within me. Don't you dare mock me. How much more do you need to ridicule me before you're satisfied? I yelled, my anger erupting at Tom and Mike, who widened their eyes in shock. After treating me like a housemaid, hurling abuse at me, and not giving me enough for living expenses, you now want me back because I inherited the condos? That's absurd. What, you plan to abandon us? Rich people really are stingy. Knowing we're struggling for money, yet still demanding payment. You're heartless. You were poor just a while ago, don't get too full of yourself. As we were arguing, my mother returned from shopping. Immediately, Tom and Mike started fawning over her. Please lend us some money. We'll probably pay it back. And isn't it unfair that only Susan got her dad's inheritance? Give me one of those condos too. Grandma, long time no see, how have you been? Please persuade Mom to remarry Dad. He doesn't want a divorce, but Mom's being stubborn. Surprised by Tom and Mike's sudden flattery, my mother's expression changed after hearing their words. She put down her shopping bag on the refrigerator's floor and took a deep breath. So shameless, both of you. What? What do you mean? Learn some shame, she exclaimed loudly. Tom and Mike were taken aback, understandably confused. As my mother usually spoke softly. She glared sharply at them and sternly said, I've heard everything about the divorce from Susan. How dare you show up here like this? Oh, come on. Susan's exaggerating. You should hear our side. Yeah, Grandma. Mom tends to lie quite a bit. I remember very well how you both behaved at my husband's funeral. My mother interrupted, continuing in a stern tone. You arrived late, didn't greet me or the relatives, and just yawned throughout the service. You left before the coffin was sent off. After behaving like that, you have the nerve to ask for his inheritance? She drove Tom and Mike to the entrance, glaring fiercely at them. We're strangers now. Don't you ever come here again. If you do, I'll call the police. She pushed them out, still in their socks, threw their shoes at their feet, and locked the door immediately. Tom, who had been reluctant to pay me, eventually transferred the money to my account, advised by his lawyer that a lawsuit would cost even more. However, since he hadn't found a job since being fired, his parents had to cover for him after hearing about his situation from relatives. They visited my parents' home, apologizing for the trouble Tom caused. After giving up on finding a new job, Tom returned to his hometown under the pretext of helping out with his family's farm. However, the reason for his divorce became common knowledge throughout the village, and people from little kids to the elderly would point and laugh at him while he helped in his parents' fields. Ah, there's stingy Uncle Tom. Even with a degree from a prestigious university and a job at a big corporation, he's no good if his wife leaves him because he's so rotten. The reason for his previous divorce was also his reckless spending. He'll never change. Being ridiculed by the folks in town is infuriating. Remarry to show them up. I got so fed up with these persistent messages that I blocked Tom's contact. His affair partner had already dumped him, as it seems the end of money meant the end of their relationship. I tracked down this affair partner using a private investigator and made sure they paid alimony properly. As for Mike, I made him reimburse the money he had recklessly spent using my credit card. Although he was enrolled in a prestigious university and was on track to follow in his father's footsteps as an elite, his constant skipping of classes to hang out led to him dropping too many credits and being expelled. His friends and girlfriends were concerned, but Mike's arrogant comments out of sheer bravado led to everyone turning their backs on him. Then, there was a huge fight with Tom, who said, "You're my son and you won't even help pay off my debts." Now, they're apparently estranged. Mike lives alone in a small apartment, making ends meet with part-time jobs. Unable to freely buy things and having to cut down on living expenses despite having an income, he's subjected to daily sarcasm. But that's all in the past now, and I feel refreshed. As my cooking website is doing well and I'm about to publish a book, I've moved to the top floor of a high-rise condo, which is part of my father's inheritance. My mom is still healthy, but she's already 73. The high-rise is close to my childhood home, so it's perfect for quickly getting to my mom if anything happens. I'm planning a surprise spa trip for her upcoming birthday. Though my marriage was a failure, I want to continue to have a good relationship with my mom. I'm giving you, a defective person who can't even have kids, a chance to gain parenting experience. Be grateful. My husband said astonishingly, walking out of the house cheerfully with Ashley. I sat there, disappointed in my husband who prioritized Ashley over me, his wife, listening to the sound of Ashley's kids wreaking havoc inside our home. Despite my husband's persistent preference for his ex-girlfriend, I had hoped and endured, believing he would eventually understand. But I had reached my limit and decided to contact someone. My name is Katie, 31 years old. I met my husband, Jack, through a matchmaking party and we've been married for 3 years. Working from home, I rarely had opportunities to meet new people and felt the pressure as my friends got married one after the other. Being an only child, I was also eager to give my parents grandchildren. That's why I chose to go to the party, where I met Jack, who shared my values. We married shortly after dating as he, too, felt the pressure of being unmarried. We had no problem staying together, so we got married soon after we met. I thought it was a good decision at the time. However, our inability to conceive soon became a source of distress. 2 years passed without a child, and Jack grew discontent, blaming me for our infertility. Yet, medical tests showed no issues on my part. Despite his harsh words, the test results gave me hope that together, we could overcome this. But Jack refused to visit the clinic with me, blaming me alone. "Hey, don't you want a baby? Let's get checked together." I suggested even undergoing fertility treatments in my eagerness for a child. However, when it comes to children, I absolutely need his cooperation. I kept pleading with Jack to take this seriously. "Why should I go to a clinic? It's your fault, you infertile woman." But my husband just made fun of me and refused to cooperate. And blaming me for our childlessness. Until now, even if my husband complained, I had hoped he was just anxious about not having kids. But his lack of understanding shocked me. Nonetheless, I continued to try to persuade him. I believed that someday he would understand one day. Then, Jack was transferred, and we moved in April. He wanted to live in his hometown, and since I could work from anywhere, I didn't object. Our new rented house, larger than the last. It allowed me a dedicated workspace, which delighted me. I thought I could concentrate on work. Close to his parents yet maintaining a healthy distance, our relationship with them was good. The place seemed more comfortable than I expected, so the new environment seemed promising. After organizing our belongings, we went shopping to get accustomed to our new life. As Jack showed me around, we walked around the store. I noticed some kids, likely siblings. They were running around the store so fast that I thought it was dangerous, but I was able to finish my shopping without incident. Exiting the store, I heard a woman calling Jack's name. She was pushing a stroller, a stranger to me, but Jack greeted her with a joyous smile. "Ashley? It's been so long. Since high school. How've you been?" I was surprised because my husband was so friendly. I thought they were friends, but not recalling her from his friends at our wedding. Curious, I asked Jack about her. "You two seem close. A friend?" "Oh. She's my ex-girlfriend from high school," he said cheerfully, leaving me speechless. I couldn't have expected him to happily tell me, his wife, that she was his ex-girlfriend, and I was taken aback. Unaware of my shock, Ashley spoke to me. "You're Jack's wife?" I was his junior in high school and his ex-girlfriend. Surprised, I didn't know how to respond. Listening to their conversation, I learned Ashley had married right after high school, had kids. She is now a single mother, helped by her parents. "It's really busy with 5 kids," she said, emphasizing her struggles. The children running around in the store were hers, I realized in astonishment. I thought she seemed like an insane person, but when she said that she had 5 children, I was surprised and looked at her. Ashley, with her heavy makeup and flashy, revealing clothes, didn't look like a mom at all, especially not one who just had kids. She still maintained her figure, which I had to admit was impressive. Hearing this, I realized she could mention her past with Jack so casually because it was just a memory for her. Then Jack said something outrageous. "That's tough. Hey, we don't have kids and you're always welcome to come over and relax at our house." "Really? That'd be a huge help with all my kids." Unbelievably, Jack suggested our home as a makeshift daycare. And Ashley seemed all too eager to take advantage, so I immediately objected. "What? Look, I work from home, so that's not gonna work." I was irritated by Jack's casual attitude and Ashley's presumptuousness. Despite my cold response, Jack chastised me. "Ashley's got it tough, you know? Looking after her kids would be a good deed. Plus, it's like practice for us, ain't it?" Ashley had been left by her husband, struggling alone. For some reason, Jack was all too eager to help her. It made me angry, considering his lack of support in our fertility journey. "That's why I don't have time for this. If you want to look after kids, do it yourself." Why should I, a complete stranger to her, sacrifice my time? Especially for someone as imposing as Ashley. "You don't have to be so harsh. That's mean." Contrary to my natural objection, Ashley played the victim, tears in her eyes. "What's with you, Katie? Ashley's doing her best alone, and you won't even help?" Seeing Ashley like that, Jack scolded me, comforting her. Seeing this, I feared our new life, which I had been looking forward to, would become a nightmare. And true to form, Ashley started bringing her kids over without any hesitation. At first, I refused to let them in, turning them away at the doorstep. But the kids caused trouble outside, disturbing the neighbors. Apparently, Ashley hardly disciplined them, leaving them to run wild like animals. I managed to keep them out, knowing they'd wreak havoc inside. Yet, Jack, having heard from Ashley, blamed me for not letting them in, leading to a fight. "I don't want strangers in the house. They'll just make a mess." Don't be so narrow-minded. That's just mean. Plus, wouldn't it be good for you to get some practice with kids? Ashley's kids ranged from a 3rd grader to a newborn. Jack argued that taking care of them would be good practice for when we have our own, despite my protests. No matter how much I said I didn't like it, my husband didn't understand, no matter how much I explained to him, and in the end, he gave the duplicate key to her. When I discovered her entering our home uninvited, I trembled with fear. As he even gave Ashley the key, we had a huge fight. Despite my efforts, the kids turned the rest of the house upside down while I protected my workspace. They ignored my warnings, running around and knocking things over. Ashley, ever imposing, demanded soft drinks and snacks, and even dinner when Jack came home. It was impossible to prepare meals for so many on short notice. Of course, I refused, but Jack sided with her, forcing me to make arrangements. Ashley didn't contribute to the additional food costs. When I mentioned it to Jack, he just said to cover it ourselves. Ashley's struggling with 5 kids. Don't be stingy. We don't have kids, so it shouldn't be a problem for us. His lack of concern for our finances frustrated me. This is our money. If you're so concerned, Jack, why don't you cover everything? When I suggested Jack pay all Ashley-related expenses, he argued that as his wife, I should help. This led to constant fighting because of Ashley. Moreover, I heard that Ashley's parents were working to support their grandchildren, so she wasn't as desperate as she let on. She showed little interest in her kids, barely responding when they talked to her. She focused on herself and neglected them. It was probably why her kids were not disciplined and so unruly. The eldest, not even 10, seemed to take care of the younger ones. It was annoying though, I felt sorry for the kids. But I had my own life to lead. I taught them basic rules for being in our house, which calmed things down a bit. But why should I, a total stranger, have to do all this? My work was disrupted, and the extra housework piled up, leaving me furious at Jack and Ashley. It got worse when school let out for summer and the kids started coming over every day. Ashley was here so often, I wondered if she even worked. They stay at home all day more than ever before, expecting lunch, too. I was at my wits' end. Jack was no help, and Ashley just played the victim. It seemed impossible to resolve anything through discussion. I didn't know what to do, so I started to worry. Then one day, Ashley came over again, expecting me to take care of her kids. I'm going on a trip for 3 days from today. Please look after my kids, she announced cheerily, carrying her suitcase. What? For 3 days? That's a problem. I was taken aback by her sudden request. Despite her parents being around, why was she leaving her kids with me? Well, the kids prefer being here. And while you're at it, please help them with their summer homework and make some memories, she said, completely disregarding my feelings. I was livid and opposed her, but she wouldn't listen. Then, to my surprise, Jack showed up at the door, suitcase in hand, smiling beside Ashley. I was confused, as Jack hadn't mentioned any travel plans. Then he dropped a bombshell. Well, I'm off on a trip with Ashley. The kids are your responsibility. What? What do you mean? I was dumbfounded by his announcement. When I confronted him, he arrogantly retorted. I'm giving you, a defective who can't even have kids, a chance to gain parenting experience. Be grateful. He seemed to think he was doing this for my benefit. He was basking in his self-righteousness. Then they left, suitcases in hand, leaving me in shock. I quickly contacted Jack, insisting it was impossible and asking why he was traveling. He explained it was to give Ashley, abandoned by her husband. As she was raising 5 kids alone, he suggested a break at a luxury resort. I had never been taken on a trip by Jack, nor had I been pampered like that. I was speechless with rage. But the sound of the kids wreaking havoc snapped me back to reality. I couldn't survive 3 days like this. My trust and hope in Jack were completely gone. I had to seek help, so I reached out to someone. 3 days later, around noon, Jack and Ashley returned, looking happy. But their smiles faded upon seeing me. Welcome back. Did you enjoy your trip? I asked cheerfully, contrary to their expectation of a worn-out me. Yeah, it was great. But where are the kids? They're quiet. Sleeping? Ashley was flustered, surprised by the absence of the usually noisy kids. No, they're awake. Hey! Your mom's back from her trip. When I called them, they came to the entrance, calm and quiet, a stark contrast to their previous wild behavior. Ashley was shocked at their transformation into well-behaved children. She was distraught and couldn't believe the change in the children's behavior. Because they used polite language and learned manners. Katie, thank you so much for everything. Come on, Mom, make sure to thank her properly. After being told by her kids to apologize for their past behavior, Ashley became almost hysterical. Why have my kids changed like this? What did you do? She was upset by the change in her children, who had always been obedient and never defied her before. As she ranted, Jack and Ashley noticed someone emerging from behind the kids and turned pale. Why are my brother and sister here? Jack, never expecting family involvement, asked tremblingly, like a child caught misbehaving. What are you doing not protecting your family? I heard about the situation from Katie and came to help. You're her husband and not helping your wife? My brother-in-law and sister-in-law looked at Jack with a mix of disdain and anger. When Jack and Ashley left for their trip, I realized I couldn't handle all 5 kids alone, so I asked my sister-in-law for help. Knowing she was a childcare worker, I explained the situation and begged for her assistance. She, angered by Jack's actions, immediately came over to support me. Moreover, she informed my brother-in-law, who also came to help as he was off work. He's a middle school teacher and former athlete, so he's physically strong. It made the kids ecstatic to play with him. Both being experienced with children due to their jobs, they redisciplined the kids in 3 days, turning them into polite and well-mannered children. After hearing my story, they assured me they were on my side and ready to help, comforting me with smiles. I wished I had asked them for help sooner. Why are you relying on my brother and sister? What are you doing? What have you done to my kids? Both Jack and Ashley tried to blame me, but they were silenced by disapproving stares from my brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and even the kids. Jack, having always felt inferior to his more accomplished elder siblings, was visibly uneasy. My sister-in-law scolded him. You're married and yet you're prioritizing an ex-girlfriend? And she cheated on you in high school, remember? She knew Ashley from high school and disliked her for being a gossip and flattering boys. I was shocked to learn that Ashley's infidelity was the reason for their breakup. I'd thought they parted amicably or just drifted apart. I never expected that my husband would be on the side of the person who cheated on him. As a man, I can't believe what you're doing. My brother-in-law added, further shrinking Jack. Frustrated, I handed Jack the contact number of a lawyer. I can't do this anymore. Let's get divorced right away. Divorce? Why? Jack was shocked, not expecting this, and his reaction only fueled my anger. Did you think I didn't know anything? I showed him the evidence of his affair with Ashley. While they were on the trip, I searched Jack's belongings and computer. I'd suspected infidelity due to his favoritism towards Ashley, but never had proof until now. Therefore, when I took this opportunity to thoroughly investigate my husband's luggage and computer, I was able to easily find evidence of his affair. I found clear evidence, including their trip reservation details left on his computer. I even went to the resort they were staying at and photographed them in the act. I wore a hat and mask, and Jack, oblivious to my presence, was enjoying himself with Ashley, mocking me. It was clear he saw me as nothing more than a convenient housekeeper and source of money. I was filled with anger and sadness, wondering what all the time spent with Jack meant. As I laid out the evidence of his cheating, Jack gradually lost his ability to argue back. Realizing the proof of his infidelity and the cold stares from everyone but Ashley, he resignedly agreed a divorce. Ashley, sensing she was at a disadvantage, perhaps wanting to escape a space with her disliked sister-in-law, urged Jack to leave. Let's get out of this family, Jack replied, trying to sound tough. Yeah, I don't need Katie anyway. As they attempted to flee with the kids, but they were unable to do so. Ashley's parents appeared at the door. What? Why are you two here? Ashley was surprised, and the kids joyfully ran to their grandparents. Ashley's parents looked tired but angry at her. I had found their contact information while searching for evidence of the affair and had informed them of Ashley's actions and the trip with my husband. They apologized and agreed to help me. You cheated again. You were divorced because of you, haven't you learned? Ashley's mother slapped her in the face. Ashley's father, amidst the chaos, was guiding the children outside, shielding them from the situation. What? An affair and divorce? Jack looked at Ashley, confused. Although Ashley had claimed her divorce was her husband's fault, the truth was different. Ashley had been unfaithful, and it turned out she had another child, making a total of 6. The oldest was from her marriage, so her ex-husband took custody, but the fathers of the other children were unknown. After the divorce, Ashley, with nowhere else to go, moved back in with her parents. Despite starting work to support their grandchildren, Ashley hadn't changed her ways. She continued to neglect her job, leading a frivolous life, resulting in more children. Occasionally, her simultaneous relationships with multiple partners led to complicated situations, burdening her parents. Frustrated, her parents were already quite stern with her, and Ashley, tired of their scolding, ended up imposing on me at my house. What? You've been seeing other people besides me? And the youngest isn't mine. Jack, apparently unaware of this, was shocked. The interaction between Jack and Ashley on his computer had started with a message from Ashley a year ago, seeking help. She was abandoned by her husband and is living a difficult life. She portrayed herself as a victim, abandoned by her husband and struggling. I never understood what Jack saw in Ashley, but her acting skills were certainly persuasive. Deceived by her act and the allure of an old flame, Jack eagerly replied and even made arrangements to meet her. This had happened about 8 months ago, when Jack told me he was going away on a business trip. Later, when Ashley claimed her youngest child was Jack's, he became even more supportive of her. Jack's transfer appeared to be influenced by Ashley's proximity and his desire to be near his supposed child. With no children between us, Jack seemed willing to defend Ashley to be with his own child. However, the timing of Jack's encounter with Ashley and the child's birth did not match. The period between their meeting and the pregnancy was too short for the child to be Jack's. If Jack had taken pregnancy and child-rearing seriously, he would have realized this sooner. I was astounded by Jack's gullibility. Upon realizing he had no children with Ashley, Jack fell into despair and sat down, overwhelmed. He had always wanted children quickly and was deeply affected by this revelation. Despite everything being exposed, Ashley still insisted she was the victim, desperately asserting her innocence. I'm the victim here. I just want to live a happy life, but because of the alimony, I can't do what I want. Her mother, unable to contain her anger, slapped Ashley, silencing her. The children, returning out of concern, calmly began to admonish their mother. Mom, you're the one at fault. You need to apologize properly. Ashley, caught off guard by her children's words, flushed with anger but was further reprimanded by her parents and finally broke down crying. Why do I have to suffer like this? She left, dragged away by her parents, still in tears. The children, full of energy, thanked us for taking care of them and returned home. I was moved by their transformation and admired their growth. Waving goodbye to the well-mannered children, I smiled. My crying husband was taken back to his parents' home by my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Despite his resistance, my brother-in-law easily subdued and escorted him away. I was grateful to them for their reliable support. Afterward, I successfully completed the divorce. Jack, realizing he had been deceived, began pleading for reconciliation, but I refused. His pleas of changing his ways were too late. I knew his affair had affected his company reputation, leading to a lower salary. Why should I be with someone who only saw me as a convenient woman? I informed my brother-in-law and sister-in-law about Jack's attempts to reconcile, and they assured me they would handle it. After that, I never received another email from Jack, giving me peace of mind. Once the divorce was finalized, I moved to a new place and now enjoy a peaceful life on my own. Previously, my life was disturbed by my indifferent husband and Ashley, along with their unruly children. Now, I relish the comfort of living alone. I have time to reflect on my rushed marriage. I had feared that leaving Jack would leave me without options, enduring his terrible behavior rather than considering divorce. Looking back, I regret not divorcing sooner to avoid wasting time. If I ever decide to remarry, I'll take my time to find someone truly compatible.